I never believed in urban legends, ghost stories, cursed places, whispers about haunted tunnels. They were just tales people told to scare each other. Or so I thought. That changed the night I found myself inside the abandoned subway. It started as a dare. My friends and I had always been fascinated by New York's forgotten underground. Those hidden stations sealed off from the public. Places that once thrived with life but were now nothing more than decaying relics. There was one in particular, Station 103, that no one talked about. It had been shut down decades ago after a string of mysterious disappearances. Some said a train would still stop there, even though it didn't exist on any official route. I didn't believe it. So, when my friends chickened out at the last minute, I went alone. I told myself I was just exploring, just proving a point. My heart pounded as I slipped through a broken maintenance door and stepped into the dark tunnel. The air was thick, heavy, with the scent of damp concrete and rusting metal. Then I heard it. A distant, distorted announcement crackled over unseen speakers. But the words were garbled, as if spoken in language that had never existed. The sound echoed down the tunnel, bouncing off the grimy tiled walls. My phone's flashlight flickered, casting shaky beams of light over old tracks, discarded newspapers, and something else. Something that shouldn't have been there. A pair of wet footprints led deeper into the tunnel. Fresh, I was supposed to be alone. That was the moment I realized. I wasn't. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat. The footprints weren't old. They were fresh, glistening under the dim beam of my flickering flashlight. Drops of water trailed alongside them, as if someone had just stepped out of a flooded tunnel. But there was no puddle, no visible source of water anywhere. I forced myself to move, following the tracks, despite the screaming instinct in my head telling me to turn back. My footsteps echoed in the vast emptiness, each one swallowed by the oppressive silence. Then I saw it. Ahead, barely illuminated by the dying glow of a single, flickering subway light, was an old wooden bench. The kind you'd see in stations decades ago. But what sent a chill racing down my spine was the figure sitting on it. A man, dressed in a dark trench coat, his face obscured by the shadow of his hat, sat completely still. He didn't move, didn't even acknowledge me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. No response. I stepped closer, my pulse hammering in my ears. As I approached, the air grew unnaturally cold, and the faint smell of mildew and something metallic, something like blood, tinged the air. I was only a few feet away now. "Sir?" I tried again, my voice barely above a whisper. The man's head twitched. Just slightly, and then he turned toward me. I staggered back, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The moment his face came into view, my stomach lurched. There was nothing there. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, featureless skin where a face should be. And yet, I felt him staring at me. I scrambled back, my breath coming in panicked gasps. The fluorescent light above him buzzed violently, flickering so fast that his shape seemed to stutter, almost like a glitch in reality itself. Then the sound came. A deep guttural screech, like metal grinding against metal, erupted from the tunnels behind me. It grew louder, a deafening, inhuman wail that sent every nerve in my body into panic mode. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. And then, from the darkness beyond the tunnel, I heard it, the sound of an approaching train. But that was impossible. This station had been abandoned for over 40 years. The screeching of the unseen train grew louder, reverberating through the tunnel walls. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it was useless. The sound was inside my head, vibrating through my skull like a swarm of bees trapped in my brain. I turned to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if the air itself had thickened around me. I forced myself forward, stumbling over loose gravel and rusted tracks. Behind me, the faceless man remained perfectly still, his featureless head slightly tilted, as if listening to the approaching train. Then the tunnel lights shut off. Complete darkness swallowed me whole. For a moment, I was trapped in a void. No sound, no sight, just the suffocating blackness pressing in from all sides. I fumbled for my phone, shaking hands, barely able to keep a grip on it. My flashlight flickered on, casting a narrow beam through the inky darkness. I wished I hadn't turned it on. The walls had changed. The grimy white tiles that once lined the subway station were now covered in something slick, pulsating, as if the station itself were breathing. Long, jagged cracks split the floor, and from those cracks a deep, crimson liquid seeped through. Thick and slow, like coagulated blood. I staggered backward, but my foot hit something solid. A door. I hadn't seen it before. It was old metal, covered in rusted bolts and faded hazard signs. One sign stood out among the rest, a faded yellow placard with peeling letters that read, "Do not open." I swallowed hard. My instinct screamed not to touch it, but the air behind me grew ice cold, and I could feel something standing just inches away from my back. I wasn't alone. A sharp whisper brushed against my ear. "He's coming." I spun around, swinging my flashlight wildly. Nothing. But then something moved. Not ahead of me. Above. I tilted my head up, and my stomach twisted in horror. Something was crawling along the ceiling. It moved unnaturally fast, its limbs bending the wrong way. Long fingers dragging against the tiles as it skittered upside down like a spider. Its skin was pale, stretched too tight over its skeletal frame. Its mouth, the only thing on its otherwise blank face, was far too wide, filled with needle-like teeth. I choked on my breath, stumbling back toward the rusted door. The thing above me twitched its head, its empty sockets locking onto me. Then it opened its mouth. A shrill, ear-splitting scream filled the tunnel, and the train finally arrived. The sound of grinding metal and screeching brakes exploded through the station as an impossibly old subway car burst through the darkness. It wasn't just old, it was wrong. The windows were shattered, doors bent inward as if something had tried to claw its way out. Its headlights barely glowed, flickering with a sickly yellow hue. And yet, it stopped, right in front of me. The door slid open with a metallic groan, revealing nothing but an abyss of shadow inside. I had two choices: stay in the station with the thing above me, or step inside the train. I didn't realize I was making a decision until my foot crossed the threshold. The moment I did, the door slammed shut behind me, sealing my fate. The doors slammed shut with a metallic clang, and I immediately regretted my decision. The inside of the train was wrong. The air was thick, damp, heavy with the stench of mildew and something else, something rotting. The seats were torn open, stuffing spilling out like exposed organs. The floor was slick, covered in a thin layer of dark liquid that squelched beneath my shoes. And then I saw them. Passengers, or at least things that used to be passengers. They sat motionless in their seats, lined up perfectly, their heads tilted downward as if asleep. Their clothes were outdated, old-fashioned suits, dresses, hats, like they had boarded decades ago and never got off. I took a shaky step forward, my breath ragged. That's when I noticed it. They weren't breathing. Their skin was gray, waxy, stretched too tight over their skulls. Their fingers, long and bony, clutched at their laps, and their heads. Oh God, their heads. They had no faces, just smooth, featureless skin, like the man from the bench. I pressed my back against the nearest wall, heart pounding so hard I thought my ribs might crack. The train shuddered, lurching forward with a violent jolt. It was moving. I stumbled, barely catching myself. The windows outside revealed nothing but an endless tunnel, stretching into an abyss of darkness. There were no station signs, no flickering lights, just an infinite void. Then, one of the passengers twitched. I stopped breathing, a slow, deliberate movement, fingers flexing, twitching like an insect regaining life after being frozen. Then another passenger moved. Then another. And another. My stomach twisted into knots as the rows of faceless figures began to stir. Their heads lifted in unison, their featureless faces turning toward me. I took a step back. They took a step forward. A low, distorted hum filled the train car. A vibration that made my bones ache. I realized with horror that they weren't just watching me. They were mimicking me. I took another step back. They did too. Their movements were unnatural, delayed, like a scratched VHS tape playing on a loop. Their heads twitched side to side, arms dangling at their sides. I had to get out. I turned, sprinting down the aisle toward the next train car. My breath came in short gasps as I grabbed the door handle and yanked. Locked, the humming grew louder. I spun around. The faceless passengers were closer now, too close. Their mouths began to form, not in the right place, but stretched along their cheeks, their foreheads, their necks. Gaping, jagged holes. And they were smiling. A deep, guttural whisper filled the train. "You shouldn't be here," I screamed. Something grabbed my ankle. I kicked wildly, my foot slipping against the slick floor. The thing holding me tightened its grip. I looked down. One of the passengers had collapsed onto the floor, its bony fingers wrapped around my leg. Then, all at once, they lunged. A flood of faceless bodies surged toward me, hands clawing, mouths stretching unnaturally wide, distorted whispers filling the air. The train lights flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows against the walls. I thrashed, trying to break free. My hands found the emergency exit handle. I yanked it down. The door burst open. I was falling, plummeting backward into the darkness. The last thing I saw, before I hit the ground, was the train disappearing into the abyss. And then, everything went black. I hit the ground hard. The impact sent a sharp pain shooting through my back, knocking the air from my lungs. For a moment, I just lay there, gasping in the pitch-black void, my body trembling. Then, silence. The train was gone. The humming, the distorted whispers, the faceless passengers, all vanished. I forced myself to sit up, my fingers scraping against cold, damp concrete. My flashlight was still miraculously in my grip, though the beam flickered weakly. I clicked it off and on, trying to steady my breath. That's when I realized something was wrong. I wasn't in the tunnel anymore. Instead of rusted tracks and crumbling walls, I was inside a subway station, but it wasn't abandoned. The walls were clean, polished tiles reflecting the dim glow of overhead lights. There were signs, advertisements, even a row of vending machines humming softly. It looked Normal. Had I imagined everything? Had I hit my head? I stood on shaky legs, scanning for any sign of life. There, a subway map. I staggered toward it, desperate to figure out where I was. My fingers traced the lines, searching for familiar station names, but I didn't recognize any of them. The map was wrong. The station names were unfamiliar, written in a strange looping script I couldn't understand. Some of the names looked like they had been scribbled out, replaced by long, jagged scratches. Then, a sound behind me, a low, metallic hum. I spun around. A subway car had pulled into the station. The same subway car. My breath hitched. The headlights flickered dimly. The door was hissing open. The inside was dark, but I could see shapes inside, shadows shifting unnaturally. Number no, no, no. I backed away, heart hammering against my ribs. I had escaped. How was I back here? Then something moved in the corner of my eye. A mirror stood against the tiled wall, cracked down the center. My reflection stared back at me, eyes wide, breath shaky. Then it moved, but I hadn't moved. My reflection tilted its head just slightly. A cold, creeping dread slithered down my spine. Then slowly, my reflection lifted a hand. Not to wave, not to signal. It lifted a finger to its lips, and it smiled. I stumbled back, my reflection still standing in place. The cracks in the mirror began to widen, spreading like veins through the glass. And then, just behind my reflection, I saw them. The passengers, faceless, motionless, standing in the mirror behind me. A voice whispered, low, distorted, barely human. You never left. The subway doors slammed shut. The station lights flickered. And everything went dark.